Alrighty, we will get started and welcome along, lads. Chris, good to see you, mate. Ben, I can see you're along with us
How you
too.
doing?
Good. Thank you guys for your patience. I had to take my girlfriend to doctor's appointment. It took longer than I thought. Here we are, all ready to go. Now, I'm going to try something a little bit different this time. I've got some slides that will help with some note taking and stuff, so you're not just looking at my head bobbing around. We'll see how that goes. It may be good, it may be terrible. We're about to find out. Let me just get that started. So hopefully you should be able to see my thing now. So if we go like this. Chris and or Ben, can you let me know now if you're seeing a slide that says creating deep connections?
Yep.
You are? Fantastic.
All good.
Cool. So we'll see how that goes, and that way there's kind of a visual, and I'll stop every now and then for some discussion. So let's have a look here. Alrighty. So what is the difference between a deep connection and a shallow, superficial one? So today we're going to be talking about creating deep connections, deep and meaningful connections. And we're going to be comparing those with what you might call shallow or superficial connections. And I want to start by saying that neither of these are better than the other in any sense. And in fact, your life is definitely going to have a mixture of both. Any healthy life would. So when I say creating deep connections, I'm not implying that a shallow or superficial connection is necessarily a bad one or a failure in any way. But what we want to look at, in my opinion anyway, I see a lot of superficial connections that could be deep. And that's what I wanted to put this one together for. I think a lot of people out there who want to have deeper relationships, friendships, and even connections with strangers or casual passers-by aren't doing so. And they're sticking with superficial or shallow relationships out of habit and out of fear. So sometimes it's always going to be good to have a superficial relationship. For example, if I'm just quickly stopping for gas at the gas station, I don't need to get into an hour and a half heart-to-heart talk with the gas station attendant. I just need to pump my gas and get the fuck out of there, and that's fine with that for being superficial. There's also perhaps there might be people at my workplace that I don't particularly like, but I need to work with. I don't want to go deeper with those people. I don't like their personality, or we're just not a good fit for each other. But we need some form of connection in order to be able to work together. So I might be okay with maintaining a superficial connection there. But the reason we're putting together this particular session is, like I said, I see a lot of people having superficial connections with their friends, with their family, with the dates that they go on, where there could be deeper meaningful if the person had either the ability to go deeper or the courage, or both. So we're having a look at that. So let's have a look at the difference. Let's start with that. Okay. I'm still playing with this thing here. So the difference between a deep connection and a shallow or superficial one. So let's just give some basic definitions. Shallow connection. The topic's conversation are non-controversial and easy. Now what I mean by this is that, you get raised with that kind of idea, never discuss religion or politics with a friend or whatever, those kind of cliches that we get raised with. This is the superficial connection. Quite often the conversations are transactional. So for example, if I'm working with a work colleague that I don't particularly like, I'm just going to say the minimum we need to say to get the job done. That would be a transactional conversation. In some superficial or shallow relationships, you get a lot of small talk. This kind of talking about safe areas that neither of you are particularly interested in, but you feel comfortable discussing. No harm will be done. Talking about the sports results, talking about the weather, talking about at a very superficial level what you've been up to, the positive things in your life. All the stuff he knows not going to set off either person, not going to create any controversy, and not going to require too much thought or courage or anything on vulnerability on your part. Just easy, nice to do. You know you're in a shallow or superficial relationship when it looks like copy and paste. We notice yourself saying the same things, using the same words over and over again with different people, where one interaction is much like another, where you can't really distinguish between people. The way you speak with them and the interactions you have with them aren't particularly unique or noticeable or memorable. It doesn't really matter who the other person is. You say the same things in the same way. And a shallow connection can be easily put down or replaced. There's no real sense of loss when it ends, unless you're particularly needy. I should probably point that out. Some people can be devastated by losing shallow relationships, but only because they're needy for a quantity. You get this a lot with, for example, like crushes and one-itis. A guy will be gutted that the girl friend-zoned him and doesn't want to see him anymore, and he doesn't even really know her. He's only ever had light, shallow conversations with her, maybe a bit of playful banter or talking about safe topics. He's in love with a fantasy of her, but doesn't actually know her. But most, in the case of superficial relationships, most of the time they're easy to put down. When that guy at your work who you never really liked and never really got deep with leaves, you don't grieve over that. Even when somebody in this kind of relationship dies, you don't feel a massive sense of loss. So it's easy to put down and replace a shallow relationship. And how does this compare to a deep connection? Well, deep connections are vulnerable and open. They're unique and memorable. So the topics of conversation, when you're deep and meaningful, it might be the first and only time you have that conversation that way. You can have conversations that you've never had before, put things into words in a way that you've never put them before, tell a story for the first time, reveal a truth that you've never revealed, or speak about an opinion as you're thinking it rather than a pre-planned or pre-scripted. There's a lot of scripting in shallow relationships. You just follow kind of patterns of speech that you've used many times before. In deep and meaningful connections, it's spontaneous and generated in the moment. You don't even know how you're going to say what you say before you say it. It just comes out in a unique way, never to be repeated perhaps, or at least not exactly that way. And therefore it's memorable. It's also memorable because it's much more emotional. In a shallow relationship, the topics are easy and light, and that's why they're so forgettable. Calm is not an emotion that seals in memories very well. But confusion, fear, excitement, and thrill, these are emotions that really seal memories, through the amygdala. So you're much more likely to remember a deep connection because you're going to be much more emotional during it. The conversations are value-based and giving, whereas a shallow conversation is transactional. You're just trying to get something done. A deep connection, a conversation is about the connection. It's about contributing to that connection. It's about contributing both to your life and the other person's in the moment. There is no job to get done. There's just meaning to be created here and now. In a shallow connection, you'll be much more tempted to compromise your values in order to get the job done. You'll tolerate someone you can't stand. You'll pretend to be nice, so on and so forth, in order to get outcomes. And sometimes it's okay. You just got to get a job done, and this isn't the time and place for your deep and meaningful. But there's always a kind of a compromise of values that might linger for you there. Whereas in deep and meaningful connections, when they're done right, so to speak, you live by your values simply in the way you engage in the conversation. You're open and honest. You're curious about the other person. You respect your own boundaries and theirs. Outcomes are unimportant. What's important is that you both have integrity, and because you both do, it becomes important and meaningful. You've had it before. Each of you will have had a time where you had a meaningful conversation with someone and it sticks with you. It's important. It stands out from all the meaningless noise that you have every day. I should warn you, for those of you who want to apply what we'll go through today, it can make small talk really unbearable when you start getting into meaningful connections. And it's important that, this isn't a selling point necessarily. It's harder for me these days to put up with small talk. I used to be okay with it. It didn't bother me particularly. But now I can barely participate. Someone starts talking about the weather, my eyes just start rolling, like I can't handle it. And I can't go back now because I've had, especially with coaching as a job, I have so many deep and meaningful connections each week. A superficial one seems very repulsive to me. And sometimes it's downside. The upside, of course, though, is that people become like irreplaceable. If I lose a friend now, there's a grief there because they were meaningful and important to me. Not a fantasy of them, but who they actually are, what we had together. Irreplaceable. Nobody else could come in and fill that gap. In a shallow conversation, anybody can fill the gap. Anybody who wants to talk about the weather or sports is good enough. But if I have a deep and meaningful connection with you, no one's going to be able to replace you because no one is you. So that's, kind of my main points of difference between deep and shallow connections. And I'll just check in with the lads here. Ben, Chris, is there anything you guys want to add to this? You can either type it in or unmute yourself if you like.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying in terms of not being able to connect with people that only discuss superficial, shallow topics. Mm-hmm. And to give you one example, at the last job that I had, I felt really awkward because I could not connect with the rest of except for one person. The others I could never connect because they talked about the weather, the animals, the sports results, and it's something that I stopped discussing a long time ago. So that's my case.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, it's worth pointing out that this is actually a cost of having deep connections. Is the shallow ones lose their flavor. It's the same like somebody has, say, a lot of shallow sexual connections. As somebody sleeps around, it can be quite enjoyable to be that kind of player until you have a really meaningful sexual experience with someone. And then going back to casual sex feels kind of forced and false. I had this experience myself. Through pickup, I eventually got to a point where I was kind of having quite frequent, meaningless sex. For me, anyway. I wasn't a player by any standards, but one-night stands were happening. And then I slept with one girl who meant a lot to me, and she was kind of like a dream girl, and I never thought it would happen. And it was it was even better than I had ever hoped it would be for so many different reasons. But after that, the one-night stands with some drunk, nameless girl that I met at a bar, it just lost all flavor. There was actually a time after that where I was having sex with a girl and it felt like I was doing push-ups. Like it was that meaningless to me. It was just physical pumping. And it was kind of ruined for me after that. One-night stands lost their thrill for me after that. And you can get this with like one-night stand conversations in a sense, that you sit there talking about the sports and chatting with people, and that can be fine. Some people can get along their whole lives like that. I know people who have nothing but that kind of conversation. But you have it like you have one deep and meaningful with someone where you really get to the core of some philosophical shit and you really explore yourselves. The next person who talks to you about the weather, you just want to shoot yourself, So I really want to point out that if you're someone who gets off on shallow conversations, and that's not an insult, there are some people who prefer that kind of connection. Be wary of trying what we're going to be talking about in this call because it may ruin that for you. It may take the flavor out of it. So good. As Ben says, quality, not quantity. What we're looking at the quality in this topic. That doesn't mean that quantity is necessarily a bad thing. But understanding you can't have both. So when we talk about deep connection, we're not talking about quantity of connections, but quality. All right, let's go back to my little slideshow. Keep that going. All right. Okay. Is it working? Yeah. So, what are the benefits of deep connections? I wanted to, in this webinar, I wanted to give equal weight to both deep and shallow connections. So I'm going to look at the costs and benefits of both so that you can decide for yourself either which one you prefer in general or which one you want to apply with each type of person. Because I absolutely believe that going deep and meaningful with someone you don't like and don't want to go deep and meaningful with is not a valuable use of time. Just as I believe going shallow with somebody that you could connect with deeply is also a waste of time. So I want to point out that when I'll keep saying this, when I say the benefits of deep connections, I don't mean that I think it's a benefit to deeply connect with everyone you come across. In fact, I think it's very important you choose, because this is quality, not quantity. You can't do this with everyone. You simply won't have the time. So let's look at the benefits of deep connections. There was I'm going to have to cite this maybe in the email follow-up. There's a TED Talk about the 70-year longitudinal study on happiness. It's been conducted over, I think it was about 1,200 participants over a 70-year period. So it started in the early-ish 1900s and was only concluded recently. And they tracked these people from birth into old age, and through various measures decided how happy they were. And I won't go into too much detail because I don't remember it all, and there's a whole TED Talk on it anyway. But what was interesting is when they came to the end of the study and had to conclude what is most likely to bring happiness into someone's life, they came to the conclusion that it was a deep and meaningful relationship. It wasn't necessarily a marriage, though that sort of appeared a lot, but it was more that the person who scored highly with happiness also was correlated highly with having deep and meaningful connections with people. So we can actually say there is some scientific validity to saying that deep and meaningful connections make life better. And the same cannot be said for shallow connections. There is, not that I could find anyway, there is no long-term happiness, confidence, meaning of life gains in having a quantity of shallow relationships and connections. The second point here, I've got setting the stage for strong businesses, friendships, and family and marriage. You know, one of the biggest lessons I've come to in my life, which I learned early on but didn't get until later, was it's all about who you know. When I look at my career, when I look at my social life, when I look at the things I enjoy, it all comes down to who is there. You know, it's very obvious in the career space. You know, if you're totally disconnected from a company that you're applying for a job for, you're much less likely to get the job than somebody who's got 10 of their best friends working there already. There's some obvious factors here. So there's actually a lot of external rewards from having deep and meaningful connections, a kind of icing on the cake. But there's also a strength to it. You know, somebody who you are deeply connected with is much more likely to be committed and loyal and encouraging and supportive than someone who only has a light transactional connection with you. You know, there's been a concept coming up a lot. The word is hypergamy. This idea of someone trading up in a romantic relationship, quite often specifically marriage, this idea that somebody will leave their partner for a better deal. Well, in my opinion, that's only going to happen if you have a superficial connection, because then a better deal is always going to come along. There'll always be someone prettier or richer or socially outranking you or whatever, an easy win for them. But when you have a deeper, meaningful connection with someone, there's no competition because no one can replace you. Deep and meaningful means that you both get to know each other very authentically. The raw, unique thing that is you is something that they become strongly invested in. You become strongly invested in theirs. Somebody who comes along looking all bright and shiny isn't going to be competition because it would take them many months or years to catch up to that level of connection, to be in a strong enough position for somebody to want to choose between the two of you. And in my experience, at least with my clients and myself, I've found this to be true. Once you create a deeper, meaningful connection with somebody, they will work to keep you. You won't have to work to keep them, in a sense. There won't be competition. Jealousy becomes a non-issue. So the strength of a connection is built in the depth of it. People invest in each other. They want to return on that investment in terms of oxytocin, the feeling of connection. It's the same with, when I look at marriages and divorces, I don't really see divorce happen very often. And this is just anecdotal experience between people who have a deep and meaningful, honest connection. And I also, what did I just say? Yeah, I see divorce happen more often with someone who has a shallow connection, that's what I'm trying to say, than with somebody who's deep and meaningfully connected. Now, it is rarer in my experience to see people deeper with that deeper, meaningful connection, but I have seen it. And when I have seen it, I've noticed that it gets through any challenge. And that's one of the benefits of going deep. When I think of deep, is like if you're sharing a lot of vulnerable information with each other, you're having really heartfelt experiences with each other and so on. It's like the roots of a tree really going deep into the ground. It's very hard to rip that tree out. A storm isn't going to rip that tree out. A shallow connection, the tree's in a pot. It's not even in the ground. The slight breeze will knock it over. It's easily replaced. Another one of the benefits of deep connections, they're exciting and unpredictable because there is no scripting. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're going to say next, what they're going to say next. You're constantly trying to get deeper, and every level of depth has a new surprise in it. You know that feeling you have when someone goes, look, I've never told anyone this before, but blah, blah, blah. And they tell you something you really didn't see it coming. It changes your view of them. You're like, whoa, I didn't know you were capable of that, or I didn't know that had ever happened to you. And this whole new picture. And with deeper, meaningful connections, it keeps getting deeper, which means it's always unpredictable and exciting. And you can see the benefits of this in a long-term friendship or a romantic relationship is it's never going to get boring. Long-term friendships and relationships that become brittle and easily broken because there's no fun left in it. There's no enjoyment. There's just routine, rote behavior, scripts. It's very easy to get bored of scripts, especially when a person changes. Two people can be bored together for a long time, but if one of them starts working on themselves, suddenly that boredom becomes unbearable. There's an absence of boredom in deep connections. When I think of the people I'm deeply connected to in my life, I always look forward to our next conversation because I never know what they're going to say. Ironically, the deeper you know someone, the more unpredictable they are. It's only shallow connections that are predictable. If you think you know someone really well, if you can predict their behavior really well, then odds are you actually have a shallow connection with them. It's only shallow behavior that's easily predicted. Deep and meaningful behavior is spontaneous and wild. Doesn't mean you can't know someone well and kind of guess what they'll do, but they should always be able to surprise you. One of the huge benefits, especially one of the most sort of selfish yet giving benefits of deep connections, is it reduces your shame. You get a practice ground for releasing shame, for being honest, for showing who you really are to somebody. And they get the gift of being able to do the same with you. So everybody gets to reduce shame. There'll be things you won't be able to tell other people because you're scared, especially in those superficial relationships. But you got this one best friend that you can let it all out with. You got this one partner who there's nothing to hide with. And you get to constantly just relieve yourself of shame every day. That's huge for confidence. And this is again builds the strength of that connection. If you're the person that they can be shameless with, if you're the only one they can really be mentally, psychologically, emotionally naked with, they're not going to want to give that up. They're not going to be easily tempted away from that. And the last benefit I had here is it's so much easier to live by your values around someone that you're deeply connected to. One of the things we've been talking about lately in Brojo is that there's some real life barriers to living by values. You're trying to be honest in a world that most people are being dishonest. Trying to be courageous when you're surrounded by cowards. trying to be responsible when you're surrounded by victims. It's hard. It's fucking hard to live by your values in the modern world. Very few people are honorable in this way. Very few people are living with consistent integrity. But when you're surrounded by only deep and meaningful connections, living by your values is a breeze because you're not getting resistance to it. You're not getting hurt by it. Nobody's telling you to stop doing it. They're all encouraging you. And you're encouraging them. And it sets you up well. You get into a habit of living by your values. So as soon as you're unexpectedly or unwillingly in the company of someone who doesn't support integrity, you'll have had a lot of practice. You'll be able to deal with that person. Yeah. So deep and meaningful connections are great for that. I want to check in with the lads here. Where are we? Did I stop? Was I sharing that screen or not? I don't know what was just happening. Okay. I want to check. Was I not sharing that screen? Huh. I am so cracked with technology. I was trying to do that. Let's see. No, that's not what I want. That's what I was trying to do there. All right, I'll get a handle of this eventually. So those are the notes there. All right. So, Ben, Chris, any thoughts, any additions to that? Any other benefits you can think of from having deep and meaningful connections?
No, I just have a question for you.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll refer to this later, but I have this going circles in my mind. So what factors determine the level of connection between two people? Is it the core values matching, openness and vulnerability, the beliefs they share? Is it their interests? What are the factors that really make people connect, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's all those things you listed, certainly factors in it. But what we'll try to get to this, we'll talk about this at the end of the call as well, the how-to of this. But in simple terms, I would say it's reciprocal honesty. And what I mean by that is no matter how honest I am with you, you match me. If that happens, there's no limit to the depth of our relationship. If you will always match how honest I am with you, then I can be as honest as possible, and so can you. When I say shallow, I guess what I really mean is restricted. A shallow connection is when there's a level of honesty that you will not follow me to. You will not invest to the same level. Or vice versa. You try to go somewhere and I won't go there. So the two of you are talking about sports and you start to try and talk about your depression and the guy brings it back to sports. It's a wall there. It can't go any deeper than that. And so that's not what I'd call a deep connection. You know what? I think maybe the better wording would be deep and meaningful connection versus limited connection. Deep and meaningful is unlimited. The only thing that limits you is yourself in a deep and meaningful conversation. You're too scared to share, but they would match you. They would be open to you sharing. You know, that's still a deep connection. It's just you're limited by your own insecurities. But when you try to go deeper and the person won't let you, they won't match you. They only ask you questions rather than sharing stuff about themselves, or they change the topic when it gets uncomfortable. That's a shallow connection. It's a limited connection. Now, it's only in that moment. These connections can change 1 minute to the next. So I could have a deep and meaningful connection with someone and then break their trust, and that would then become a limited connection. They would no longer share to a certain level with me because they're scared of my unpredictability. And the other way around, I could have I've done this before. I've had superficial connections with someone for years, and then I finally open up a bit more to them, and they surprise me by opening up too. And we suddenly go from shallow to deep just like that, realizing that, holy shit, I didn't know we were allowed to cross that line. Let's see what else we can do. Actually, my connection with David Greer, the other coach, I first met David in Department of Corrections. We used to work together, and it started as what you might call superficial. There was a limit to how much we'd talk about and share. I don't know when it happened exactly, but at some point we crossed the line. And now there's no limit to what we can talk about with each other. It's a deep connection now. So, yeah, Chris, to answer your question, essentially it all comes down to honesty being equal from both parties, and this kind of openness where both parties will allow the other person to keep going deeper and will match them, which encourages them to keep going deeper. Neither person is trying to limit the other person. Hope that makes sense. We'll talk about more of the practicalities of doing this, of finding that line with people near the end of this. All right, let's attempt the fucking screen share once more. Okay. And let's have a look. Okay. Hopefully you guys are seeing this screen now. Costs. Like I said, I want it to be fair and balanced. So let's talk bluntly about the downside of deep connections, because there are some, and it's worth acknowledging. First and foremost, grief. It hurts to end a deep connection. You know, it hurts to lose the meaningful, wonderful things in life, especially in this world we're in right now where they're so rare and therefore so valuable. You know, if you've got a deeper, meaningful connection with somebody and they leave, or they lose interest in you, or they die, that you're going to get hurt feelings. You're going to be emotionally rocked by that. You know, a lot of the guys I speak to in Brojo actually fantasize about being unaffected, the James Bond type fantasy. Being this guy who's never touched emotionally by any loss. You know, when I say nothing to lose, that's not what I'm talking about. Nothing to lose means being willing to bring on this hurt. Being willing to go so deep that you can get hurt. That's nothing to lose. Nothing to lose does not mean making yourself immune to pain. You cannot go deep and meaningful without letting someone affect you. It's interesting. One of the biggest barriers I had to participating in my current relationship with my girlfriend was that no matter how many sort of confidence practices I employ and how much stoicism I rely on and so on, if she's in a bad mood, it affects me. If she's upset, it upsets me. We're so deep that I cannot be unaffected by her. It's one of the price. It's a kind of part of the price I pay for having such a deep and vulnerable connection with her, as it means I feel her pain. There's a lot of empathy in a deep connection, and it's unavoidable. You know, you can't be deeply connected and psychopathic. You're going to be affected emotionally by the other person. So you're going to be really affected when it's over. Now, some people think they have a deep and meaningful connection because they're really affected by it being over. You get this a lot with big breakups and divorces. But what they're really affected by was the loss of the fantasy of some future great relationship with the person, whereby the current one was actually awful, and it's very obviously awful. The cost of a deep connection is you're actually losing something real, a connection you really did have, not just a fantasy, but something you looked forward to, something you participated in actively, not just something you dreamed of. Quality versus quantity. Deep connections are costly in terms of time and attention. Okay, you can't have a deep connection with someone in a 5-minute chat at the bus stop. I mean, you kind of can, but time is a factor with deep connections. I can quickly have superficial connections. I could talk to 100 people in a day superficially without getting tired. Easy. Done it a million times, you know, or thousands of times. Stop exaggerating. But deep and meaningful, like I can only have a couple of coaching sessions a day and I'm done socializing, you know, because I just can't go that deep all day long. I need time to reflect. I need time to recover, you know. I've got there's actually a barbecue I'm kind of not sure I'm going to go to this afternoon because I've got this webinar and then I've got a coaching session later today. I'm not sure I'm going to have anything left, especially after socializing with my girlfriend as well on top of that. So you're going to have less quantity of connection if you go deeper because you just won't have the energy and the time and the attention to manage a lot. Deep connections, especially the building of them, are polarizing. They're risky. You know, superficial is how you avoid rejection and confrontation and uncomfortable situations socially. Deep and meaningful is you have to dive into those. The real connection is created on the other side of those. If I go risk a rejection with someone and they don't reject who I really am, if I go and show them who I really am and they like me, we have a deep connection, but I have to risk that they won't and that they'll react negatively. If I show who I really am to people, I have to risk polarizing them. They might not just dislike me, they might hate me. When I was superficial, I had people who didn't like me, but it was to a really limited depth. They didn't know much about me, so there wasn't much they could dislike. Nowadays, when someone doesn't like me, they really don't like me personally. And I'm okay with paying that cost, but it's one that you have to prepare for. I've got quite a thick skin to that now. But when it first started happening, it was tough, especially when I started losing superficial connections. I used to have a high quantity of shallow friends, or shallow friendships, I should say. They weren't shallow people necessarily. And then as I started being more me, more bold, more honest, especially more truthful about what I liked and didn't like, what I wanted to do and didn't want to do, these friends started drifting away, and some of them actually it came to direct confrontation. I had more than one person tell me that I'd changed and they didn't like that. I had to make them love or hate me. I couldn't let them sit in that kind of swampy maybe land of just like. And this, of course, leads to a reduction in numbers. You'll have a small social circle if you like deep connections, but it'll be high quality. You'll look forward to seeing each person. Each relationship will be unique and irreplaceable. It'll be very high quality, but there won't be many of them. There won't be a party full of 100 people who you all call friend. It'll be more like a lunch with 6 people who know you down to your very core. And I really want to point out that just because I go on about deep connections doesn't mean that it's right for everyone. I've even met guys in Brojo where I asked them the classic question, would you rather have 100 people who like you or 5 people who love you? And there are some people who say, I'll take the 100. And they mean it. They don't want to have deep and meaningful conversations. They like a big quantity of people in their life where things are kept light and breezy and casual and superficial. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. And the extreme end of that is psychopathy, but there's some people who have psychopathic traits without being psychopaths. They're not big on deep and meaningful connections. They don't have much empathy or compassion. It's not a fault. It's just a personality type. They have their strengths in other areas. Deep and meaningful connections are going to be a waste of time for people like that. But if you're part of Brojo, odds are, given the kind of constant flavor of our work, you're probably chasing quantity when you really want quality. I need to really emphasize you can't have a big group of deep connections. You're going to have to give up the numbers. You're going to have to cut down your fame and popularity to a small group of dedicated connections. So some of the costs of deep connections. Being Christian, is there any other costs that you can think of?
Not really. I agree with what you said. It's about quality over quantity. And yeah, I'd rather keep the 5 instead of the 100.
Well, it's important to know that because a lot of people will say they want the 5 and not the 100, and yet their approach to socializing is to get the 100. They try to get as many people to like them as possible. They try to avoid rejection. They're light and superficial with people. You're going to get the 100 behaving that way. It's like the amount of people who got into pickup artistry to find a loving partner. That doesn't make any sense. If you want to find a loving partner, then seducing people with strategy and deception only takes you further away from that. It takes you closer to like lots of shallow relationships, which could be fine if you're into that. But if you're using a quantity strategy, you're going to get a quantity result or nothing at all. But you're definitely not going to get a quality result with a quantity strategy. It's important people kind of take this in. If you're avoiding rejection, then you're asking for the 100, not the 5. You need to know what you're chasing. I just saw a chat thing came up. Ben's got another example of a cost. Jealousy from friends and partners who tend to have more shallow connections. Yeah, actually, especially in the transition, when you start choosing who you're going to spend more time with, that means you're going to have to take that time away from people. You will naturally start to self-select who the deep connections are. Like I used to do this exercise where, in order to help me transition, is twice a week I ask myself, who do I spontaneously want to see right now? And then I'd invite that person to lunch. But what this means is I wasn't inviting a huge list of people to lunch. I was only inviting the person I really felt in the moment like seeing. And this naturally selected a lot of people out. And some people got pissed off at me for doing this. They're like, how come you never call? How come you aren't texting anymore? Why are you spending so much time with him and not with me? They'd either say this or imply it. I started to realize, well, there's actually some people who, for whatever reason, want to cling to our shallow connection. I know we have a shallow connection because I'm not deeply connected to them. They seem to think we have something important. Or maybe I'm the deepest connection they've got, and everything else that in their life is even more shallow. Or more likely, they're just needy about numbers. They're like a child with a toy. You take it away and they chase after it, even if they're not sure they want the toy. So like Ben's saying here, when you transition into deep connections, you essentially become the person who does the rejecting. You're the one who starts to say no to people, even if it's just implied by saying yes to others. And you may get some reactions to this. And you're going to have to just tolerate those reactions. You also need to be careful. You may, like I said, so many people who want the deep connections, but they use the shallow connection strategy. They go out to try and meet more people, meet new people. And the people they could be real friends with are being neglected. I see this, actually I've seen this in Brojo quite a bit. I'll see a guy who wants deep and meaningful friendships. He's never had them before, or very few. He comes into Brojo, he starts forming those connections with other Brojo guys, and yet when it comes to socializing, he goes out to try and meet new people. It doesn't make sense. Just because somebody likes you doesn't mean you get to keep them and move on to somebody else. It means go deeper with that person. It's not about quantity, and I've got to keep emphasizing this. A lot of people say they want deep quality relationships, but they approach socializing from a quantity perspective. They're trying to get new and more and often and frequent. Rather than like, let's stick with the person I really liked and go even deeper. Quality means seeing the same person twice in a week, not seeing two different people a week, not seeing two different people a night, right? There's no rules around this, but just notice, how do you approach socializing? Are you trying to add more people? Are you trying to go deeper with the people you got? Because you should only be adding more if you don't have anyone you can go deeper with, or you have a lack of people to go deeper with. All right, let's try the next slide. That works. What about that one? That. All right. What do we got next? The benefits of shallow connections. Like I said, I wanted to be fair on this one, so let's quickly look at the benefits of shallow connections. Well, they're easy, aren't they? Easily created and easily maintained. I want to highlight that deep connections aren't necessarily hard, but they can be hard to learn how to do at the beginning. I find it easy to create deep connections now, but that's because I'm okay with polarizing and rejection now, and that was hard to get okay with it. But you can start off being okay with shallow connections. It's easy to talk about the weather. It's easy to find some surface level commonality you have, like a love of travel or rugby, and talk about that and keep things positive. It's easy to check in and just have the same conversation with the same person every day and just maintain it. There's no real effort required. You can go on autopilot a lot of the time. A lot of your answers are scripted. How was your weekend? Fine. How was yours? Good. Oh, that's good to hear. Same shit day after day. Very easy to do. They're transactional and simple. They get a job done. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, the guy at the gas station, maybe he's not going to be your next best friend. Maybe you just need to get gas. And you know what you need to say in a shallow connection. You don't have to think deeply about what the real truth is for you. You just say the thing that gets the job done. So it's very simple. Deep connections are more complex. You're going to have a much broader range of emotions to deal with. You're going to spend time in confusion. There will be conflicts and confrontations. You're not going to get that in shallow connections. Any sort of confrontation will be so surface level that you won't even feel it. You won't care. They're predictable. And like I mentioned before, they're predictable because you're seeing such a small part of someone. It's easy to predict a small part of someone. It's like when I used to work with criminal offenders and I only looked at their crime, it was easy to predict their crime. But I couldn't predict the range of other things that they did throughout the day. I couldn't really know them as a person. I could just see one particular pattern of behavior that led them to steal a car or beat up their partner or whatever. But I didn't know the real them. And ironically, I could predict their criminal behavior quite well, but they surprised me a lot when it went outside the criminal behavior. It's part of what started me on this work. When I started having deeper connections with criminals, I realized they were a lot more like me than they were unlike me. I started to realize that I have my own sort of criminal way of thinking, and this, indirectly contributed to Brojo even being created. Shallow connections are mostly risk-free. If there's any loss, it doesn't hurt you that badly. If a shallow connection at your work doesn't like you anymore, it's probably not going to hurt your career that badly. If you're on a date with someone, you didn't really connect with them, and they don't want to see you again, there's no great loss. But actually, as I say it, I realize there is some big risks in shallow connections. When I say it's risk-free, I mean it's risk-free in terms of short-term pain. It's unlikely that anything particularly bad's going to happen during a superficial conversation. But there are longer-term risks, of course. There's a long-term risk like being married to somebody but having a superficial connection with them. 10 years of your life down the toilet just because you were originally attracted to each other and needy about being single. That's pretty risky. So the risk isn't necessarily in the superficial connection. The risk is in only having superficial connections and mistaking your fantasy of the person for a deep connection rather than actually being deeply connected to the real person. But largely in terms of hanging out at the office or going on a date, there's not much trouble you can get into with a shallow connection. There's a deep and meaningful connection, all kinds of conflicts can come up. And one of the benefits is you can have a large social circle. You can become a social butterfly when you're a shallow connector, You can have lots of people who know you. You can have lots of friends on Facebook. If you have a party, lots of people can show up. You can have a big quantity. The downside, of course, it's flaky and disloyal. They're only going to stick around as long as you are some sort of value to them, as long as you provide a service of some kind. It's conditional love, shallow connections. So if you're the funny guy, you have to keep making them laugh or they're going to leave. If you're the good-looking guy, you need to remain good-looking. If you're the rich guy, you need to keep buying stuff. They're going to be essentially hypergamous. As soon as whatever you provide loses its flavor and a better, shinier option comes up, they're going to bail on you. You can see this with celebrities, how their audiences rise and fall, how somebody can be well-loved one day and then reviled the next day. It's because an audience is never deeply connected to a person, especially a person who's as fake as like a Hollywood celebrity, and you never really get to see the real them. Ironically, you can also see this in the real celebrity world. If you see someone like Will Smith, who regularly posts vulnerable, raw videos about his deep inner world on the internet, he has a really solid fan base who are really loyal to him, and he thrives as a result. So you can even have large numbers with deep connections, but it's kind of one-sided. They know you very well, but they might be anonymous to you. But they'll be, again, much more loyal and committed to you if they're allowed into your deeper world. Whereas if you're just, you're just some funny entertainer and it's all fake, then they're going to turn on you as soon as it's lost. A great example of this is you look at Bill Cosby, the comedian, well loved by millions of people. As soon as they find out he's a sexual predator, boom, He hits the gutter. No more fans, really. There's nobody backing Bill Cosby anymore. Whereas somebody else like Louis C.K., again, a well-loved comedian, sexual allegations brought against him, which he admitted to, but his fan base stays loyal. Why? Because if you watch his comedy shows, you get to see the real him. You get to connect with him deeply. Whereas Bill Cosby was always just an act, you know? So, you can have a large social circle, essentially, but there's some downsides. Which brings us to the question, how do you choose which is most important to you and when it's most important? You know? Let's have a look at this. It's all about what do you want? What do you want socially? Okay. As we've talked about a lot already with Ben and Chris, quality versus quantity. Which is more important to you? It seems, a lot of people seem to think they know the answer to this, but like I said, if I observe their behavior, they're going for the opposite one, right? There's so many people who say they want quality, but they're trying to please everybody. They're trying to be entertaining and funny and transactional. They have nothing but small talk with new people. They don't polarize. They avoid rejection. That's a quantity strategy. You can't get quality that way. In fact, you prevent quality. I can't get to know you if you're putting up a wall of niceness. You know, if you're not showing me those times where you feel confused or antisocial or angry or stressed. I need to see all of you to connect with you deeply. I can't just see the funny guy. I can't just see the lovely guy. I can't just be the guy who pleases me and is polite, you know? So you have to know what you want. If you want quality, you're going to have to sacrifice quantity, or at least be willing to. You might be surprised at the quantity that does evolve. I do have actually quite a large number of deep connections through my work as a coach. Ironically, I probably have more deep connections now than I had shallow connections when I was younger, but I wasn't trying to get a quantity. That's the important part. I'm willing to sacrifice quantity. I'm willing to have most of the world hate me in order to be connected to the ones who love me, you know. And I behave as such. I polarize people. I scare people off with honesty. You know, if I meet someone new at a party, they get 5 minutes to basically either love me or leave me. I make sure of it. When they say, oh, hasn't it been nice weather? I say, yeah, but I was quite depressed last week. I'm only just getting over it. I'm like, look, let's go deep or fucking shut the fuck up, right? I've learned to become that way. It was very scary for me to do that at first. For many years, it was scary. It's no longer so terrifying because of my deep connections, but I had to give up the quantity strategy. You can't hold on to both simultaneously because they're counterproductive strategies. If you go to quality, you'll sacrifice numbers. If you go for numbers, you will sacrifice quality. You can't cling to both. They pull in the opposite directions. You got to decide, what do you want in your life? Do you want love or do you want access to stuff? If you go for quality, deep connections, love is the kind of end result, but they might not have anything else to provide for you. You might find your deepest connection is with someone who's homeless, you know, someone who can't provide any service to you, somebody who's not going to give you money, somebody who's not going to give you validation, somebody who can't give you a leg up in your career. You know, most of the clients I work with, it's really interesting in coaching. When you learn to become a coach in the training courses that you do, quite often they'll talk about you got to get referrals, you know. Make sure you get clients who will refer you on to other clients. Well, ironically, most of my work is with people who have very little to no social circle. There's no one for them to refer me to. So I had to sacrifice the potential extra clients that this one client can get me for the quality and the love of the client himself. I love working with my clients, but a lot of them are socially, lacking. They're going to be my only client from that particular social circle. So I have to give up my access to these kind of external stuff, money, numbers, quantity, validation, in order to have the love of just this one person. Connection and proximity. So connection is a feeling of depth with someone, of openness, vulnerability, acceptance, and respect. It's this thing where you feel connected even when you're by yourself. You don't need somebody else around to feel complete and good enough, because your connections are so deep with someone. Versus proximity, where if people aren't around you, you feel alone. Right? Where you need the people to actually be present in your space. Do you want the people to be around all the time, or do you want to feel connected? Because those are two different strategies. You can surround yourself with people, but it won't necessarily be a connection. Think of it like sex. I can go pay a sex worker so they can have sex anytime I want, but there'll be no connection in that sex. She's doing her job, and it's faked. I've never had a sex worker, but I've heard plenty of stories. Whereas a connection, it might be rare for me to have sex if I'm focused on connection. I'll have high standards and I'll only look for the right person, but when we do have sex, it'll be so rewarding, there'll be a smile on my face for a month. That kind of difference. The difference between interdependence and independence, and this is an important one. When your connections are superficial and shallow, you're very independent. You can drop everything and move country very easily. You can do whatever the fuck you want all the time. You can upset people if you want to really easily, because who cares if you lose them, kind of thing. You know, one of the hardest things for me in connecting with my girlfriend is the interdependence. I can't just randomly do whatever I want all the time now. It'd be too hard in our relationship. I've got to talk things through with her. We have to arrange our schedules together. I've become so open and vulnerable with her that we actually hold each other up now. You know, there's things she does for me that if she stopped doing them, it would be fucking chaos in my life, and vice versa. We've intertwined ourselves together. Now, I don't need her. I'm not dependent. And she doesn't need me. She's not dependent on me for satisfaction in life. But we've wrapped our lives around each other so firmly now that if one was to bail out, the other person would have a hard time. Whereas in shallow connections, that doesn't happen. You can just drop anyone anytime. There's no reliance. Risk versus safety. Shallow connections are safe, essentially. It's hard to get hurt in a shallow connection. The only pain you'll feel is the fantasies being killed, or the loneliness. Whereas in deep connections, there's a higher risk of polarizing, rejection, confrontation, vulnerable, sore things about yourself being revealed. You know, nudity of self being revealed in that way, a sense of risk. Ironically, these are actually reversed. If you're really open and honest with people for a long period of time, if you create deep and meaningful connections, you'll be well protected both by yourself and by them. You'll have staunch supporters who've got your back because they know you so deeply and so deeply invested in you, and you'll be resilient to anybody else trying to fuck you over because you've had so much shamelessness practice. So in my opinion, it's actually much safer to go for deep connections. It's just a higher risk at the start. Whereas if you're all alone in the world with nothing but superficial connections, I mean, then you're Bill Cosby, you know? You do something bad, you're all alone instantly. No support, fucked. Because you never really had any. It was all an illusion, you know? You got to choose between community and freedom of movement. The more deep connections I have, the kind of more restricted my movement is. I have more time with less people. I can't just flit around. I can't just jump on a plane tomorrow and go wherever the fuck I want. I can't just drop Brojo and just go start some, you know, milk production business or something like that. I'd have to think it through because a lot of people would be affected and harmed by it. That's community. I'm part of a kind of a tribe, a village of people I've created of deep connections. I can't just bail on that now. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to. Whereas if everybody's shallow, I can just pick up sticks, make big changes in my life whenever I feel like it. So I don't need to worry about other people being affected. And last one is I call it support versus supply. So deep connections will support you. They've got your back when you're at your worst. They don't ask for anything in return because you're already reciprocal anyway. You don't need to pay them for it. If anything, you'll feel guilty about how supportive they are, but they actually get a thrill out of supporting you because they love you so much that they're rewarded by helping you. It's kind of this free support. Versus supply, which is kind of it's conditional. They'll only support you if. Someone will only be loyal to you and have your back if they get paid. And I don't just mean money, but whatever it is you provide to keep the shallow connection going. You know, the person will only support you at the job interview if you supported them at their job interview. You know, the person will only loan you money if they know they're going to get paid back. You know, money's a great example of this. In a deep connection, the person will be like, how much do you need? I'll write you a check. You just pay me back when you can. They're willing to kiss that money goodbye because of how much they love you. But a shallow connection, they'll be like, all right, let's get a contract out. There'll be 3% interest. I expect this amount of money this time. Or they just won't give you money because there's no reason to. They don't see you as rewarding enough. So obviously my description of these kind of is skewed towards my own bias of deep connections. But you got to look at this and just look, you know, what side of the fence are you on? You know, do you want quantity that you have very little connection or obligation towards, but no connection, you know, you kind of sense of loneliness and isolation? Or do you want to be kind of interdependent with a community of deep connections that can both bring you pain and love and will, you know, they've got your back, but you can't just bail on them and be whimsical and fully independent? There's a cost-benefits analysis you need to make here, and you need to know what it is because it will determine how you socialize. Your socializing will be either strategic to create superficial, quantity connections, or it will be open, honest, and integral to create deeper, meaningful connections, a small quantity of them. Need to check in with you guys on the call. Is there anything you want to add to that, or any thoughts that come up when you look at those two choices? I mean, when you look at that, is it clear about what you want?
No, I think it's good. I think it's clear and potentially also enlightening to maybe some past experiences.
What kind of past experiences come up for you when you look at this list?
For me personally, I think it's sort of going to a relationship area, sort of me wanting a particular kind of relationship where there is interdependence and things like that, but potentially then trying to remain guarded in some aspects of what I give, and then, you know, potentially that creating a conflict which the other person will probably rightly pick up on and say, you know, you want this from me, but you're not really prepared to open yourself up that much in return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a kind of reciprocal. That's, I think when I say there's risk in a depth connection, that's what I'm talking about, is you're going to have to go all in on it, aren't you? You can't kind of have the cake while the other person eats nothing.
Exactly.
And that feels like a risk, doesn't it? It feels vulnerable to do that. You have to open it up to them disappointing you, them hurting you, them betraying you. All those risks need to be taken for a deep connection to happen. And they're real risks. People can get fucked over trying to create deep connections. We'll be talking about this later on the call, is sort of how to do this without being stupid or naive about it, how to do it without like setting yourself up to be conned. But there's always going to be a risk of being conned, of someone making you think you have a reciprocal deep relationship with them, but they're kind of fucking you over. Ironically, though, in my experiences, the more confident I became with doing these, it just doesn't happen to me anymore. Now, I've got to take into account that I've been trained to work with manipulative criminals, so maybe I'm kind of better at picking up on it than I once was. But yeah, I'm always aware that when I open up to someone, there's always a risk that they could use it against me. And that's a risk I'm just kind of willing to take, essentially, in order to find deep connections. But it's a real risk. When you look at this list, Ben, you know, what side do you think you're leaning towards?
I'm definitely leaning more towards the deep. And when I look at sort of who I consider the people I want to be spending my time with, we tend to sort of have that kind of relationship, even if we haven't in the past. Yeah.
Well, in that case, I guess for you to reflect on after the call was, what kind of strategy are you using to socialize? Are you using the depth strategy or the quantity strategy? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Chris, did you want to say something as well there, mate?
Yeah, I have the other problem. I'm naturally very deep and like to have meaningful conversations most of the time. And since you published or since you did that podcast on the three aspects that should be contained in a conversation, I've learned to become more playful and not being too in the very beginning. Start from high up in the superficial level and then start digging down. So for me, it's always been about quality, and normally in groups I would connect whenever I go into a group meeting or a group activity. I would connect with one or two people within the group naturally. Yeah, so that's me.
You raise a pretty good point here that comes up, actually. Well, it's been coming up a lot in Brojo, where deep and meaningful gets interpreted as serious. That playfulness gets reduced the more deep and meaningful you get.
Yes.
And I really want to point out that playfulness can interact easily on both sides of the fence here, but it'll probably be quite different. Like when I was quite superficial in my connections, my playfulness was really about humor. I was kind of like a stand-up comedian. I told a lot of jokes, or I was a lot like Chandler from Friends, very sarcastic, very guarded, and used humor as a way to block people of seeing how I really felt about things. Always joking about stuff all the time, funny comments, shit like that. That was my version of playfulness, self-deprecating. Whereas my version of playfulness now would be like, it still might be humorous, but it would be playing with deep and meaningful things. So, for example, I've got this habit of telling stories to my girlfriend that are really just stories that guys want to talk about, not girls. And I'll be about halfway through the story before I realize that she has no interest in what I'm saying because it's just such a guy thing to talk about. And I get embarrassed when that happens. And so my playfulness in the relationship is to call out that embarrassment as it happens. And, I usually say something like, and that's my story. And it's just a sign that it means like, oh, I've said something that I know she's just like waiting for me to finish and is bored. So it's still playfulness, but it's about something real. It's a way of showing like, you got me. Playfulness is like showing where you got yourself wound up in an argument over nothing. Calling out who you really are and the weaknesses you have in a gentle, compassionate, and playful way. It doesn't have to be like, oh God, I told a stupid story again. I'm such a fucking loser. Actually, that'd be pretty funny. But just this idea is like playfulness is a no banter, superficial, blocking humor used to hide how you truly feel. That's not playfulness. In fact, it's really quite serious and strategic, ironically. Like I was very sarcastic and funny and made a lot of people laugh, but I didn't laugh at my own jokes. Why? Because they weren't funny to me. They were designed to make other people laugh. That's a serious strategy, not a funny one. Whereas now, especially like I'm big on dad jokes now. I don't know why. I just love making really pointless, stupid jokes. Nowadays, it's quite often that I'll be the only one laughing at my jokes. Because they're about me. They're deep and they're kind of like, two friends will have private jokes, as they call them, or private humor, or in jokes, in-person jokes, in-group jokes. Playfulness can happen at a level where you only get it because of the deep and meaningful connection. Other people listening are just like, what? You see this with best friends quite a lot. They're pissing themselves laughing over something, and everybody watching them is just like, that's not funny. Because it relates to a deep and meaningful experience, a vulnerable experience that they had, But, it's very easy to get serious when you're trying to be vulnerable. the key is to, we won't talk about it on this call, but the key is to understand that deep and meaningful does not necessarily mean serious. Okay, in fact, you'll find you're a lot more serious in the superficial level because you're so strategic. You can be a lot more spontaneous and carefree, which is forms of playfulness in the deep. You can just speak your mind even if you get it wrong. You can say stupid things that make no sense. You're allowed to do all that in a deep connection. In a shallow one, you have to be much more careful and moderated. A very good point, Chris. Very good. All right, so I think now we'll move on to the practical. I always like to leave that to the end because I'm mean, I think. But let's just bring that up. Okay, so let's look at how. How do we create a deep connection? There's nothing new coming up, but what I've learned is essentially the 3X model and how it applies to creating deep connections is something you have to hear over and over again and revisit after you've practiced it because it makes more and more sense over time. So for those of you watching, like either on the call or on the recording, you might not hear much new stuff coming up, but it's worth listening to again and again. Okay, it's worth reviewing after you've practiced it because it reveals deeper levels of truth each time you use it. So to revisit the 3X model, there's 3 main values: curiosity, honesty, and respect. And we're going to talk about how that applies to a conversation so that the conversation has the best possible chance to be deep and meaningful. Now, curiosity is the bit that happens inside your head. It's important that you don't mistake curiosity for questions. And what I mean by that is curiosity doesn't mean asking the other person questions. I want to emphasize that because what I've found is that asking another person questions can actually be a barrier to a deeper connection. It's counterintuitive, I know, but the problem with asking questions is you don't really reveal anything deep about yourself. It's actually a protective mechanism. If I ask you a question, you're then forced to answer. You're forced to give me information, but I haven't given you shit. I'm mining you for information. You can see this in an interview. You watch an interview, one person interviewing another. You learn a lot about the person being interviewed, but you learn nothing about the interviewer, except what questions they ask. That's all you know about them. And you have to guess at what kind of person they are based on the questions, you know? But if you watch a conversation between 2 best friends, there's very few questions. There's just statements. You say this, I react to it, you react to my reaction, back and forth, back and forth. So when I say curiosity, I do not mean asking questions to the other person. I do, however, mean asking yourself questions inside your head, at least until this becomes automatic. Some of the questions, what more do I want to know about the other person? You know, when you're strategic, when you're trying to make the other person like you, you don't really ask this question. You're more asking yourself, what can I do to make them like me? What I found when I was doing pickup and stuff like that is I started to feel more isolated and psychopathic than ever before because I wasn't really getting to know people. I wasn't really interested in them as a person. I was just interested in what could I get from them and how could I get it. That's not curiosity. That's just strategy. Okay, that's like battling a war, not making a connection. I remember one of my biggest breakthroughs with pickup that made me leave it was I once used banter and questions with a girl at a bar all the way back to my bedroom. By the time we got to my bedroom, she had no fucking idea who I was because it had all been a big act. But I knew heaps about her. And I chose not to sleep with her that night, even though she wanted to, because it just felt so fucking wrong to me. It felt like one step short of rape. She had no idea who I was, and yet she was about to sleep with me. I clearly tricked her into this because I didn't care about her. I had no interest in her as a person. All I was interested in is trying to get what was between her legs so I could tell my mates about it. You know, and that was my big, one of my big epiphanies in pickup when I realized I don't want to do this anymore. So now, when I'm interacting with someone, I ask myself, what am I actually interested in this person? What is it about them I actually want to know? Not what do I want to know so I can get something? Just what do I want to know? What aspects of this person actually spark my interest? If they're talking about their job and I don't care about their job, it's important that I know that, because I'm not going to explore their job with them if that's the case. But, if they've said that they went on a trip somewhere and I've been on a trip, I'm like, actually, I want to know more about their experience of that trip. That's a genuine curiosity. It sparked an interest from a real place. Then there's the questions you ask yourself. One of my best curiosity questions, if you want a connection to go deep, is you ask yourself, what don't I want to share due to shame? What don't I want this person to know about me? Because if you can share that thing, you've just created a deep connection, or at least you've invited them to become one. See, limited connections or shallow connections are when this thing is not shared. That's the limit. Now, everybody's got a limit, let's be fair. But the higher up the limit, the more shallow the connection is. So if I don't even want you to see a single emotion I have, then we'll have a very shallow connection. Whereas if I ask myself, what do I not want to share, and I realize I'm attracted to you, and I'm embarrassed to tell you that, and then tell you I'm attracted to you, our connection has just got the chance to go deep. Because if you're going to at least be honest in your response to that, you may not like me back, but you're going to be open and vulnerable in the way that I've been. We've now got no limits. We can go anywhere. So the answer to that second question, what don't I want to share, is the wall between you and a deep connection with this person. If that thing comes out, deep connection is possible. If it doesn't, you'll always have a limited connection. And this third one is really big for deep connections. What are my true intentions? People trying to be honest can quite often talk about what they like, what they don't like, what they want, what they don't want. But what they often leave out is why they're saying that. It's in my opinion, it's the deepest thing you can share with someone is your intentions. Like, I might be having a conversation with my girlfriend and realize that even though I'm talking about my feelings, what I'm really trying to do is change the way she behaves. I'm hoping that when she hears about the way I feel, she'll change the way she behaves. But I haven't said that. I've just been talking about the way I feel. So my true intention is actually to control her, but I'm not telling her that. So real honesty, the answer to that second question, would be to tell her, hey, by the way, I'm just telling you all this stuff because deep down I'm hoping it will change your behavior and that will make life easier for me. That's, true intentions is when you notice you're manipulating someone, which we all do, and then you tell them that you're doing that. That's the deepest, then you're totally vulnerable. Then you can't manipulate them. When you reveal your true intentions, strategy dies. I probably still would to this day if I was single, but I used to use this as a way to break out of pickup habits. So I'd be talking to a girl and making her laugh and realizing, shit, I'm just making her laugh to make her attracted to me. So then I'd tell her that. I'd be like, you know what? I just told you that joke because my experience makes girls more attracted to me when I tell them that joke. So now I'm being open and honest. I'm like, look, I'm trying to seduce you and I'm actually using some strategy and tactics to do that, just so you know, so it can't work. I let go of the strategy. I ruin the strategy, essentially, so that we can have a deep connection. I sacrifice quantity for the potential of quality. Yeah. Now, these questions that you ask inside your head, the honesty is the next bit where you say the answers out loud, not as a question, but as a statement, as a sharing of who you are. But these are the three questions that I would use to create a deep connection. This is what I check in with myself before I speak, and there may be others as well. Honesty. Let them see it all, but don't let them see it all at once. We'll get into this in a second. So some people who, like Chris mentioned, they've found they've only ever been interested in deep connections. They don't like small talk. They don't play games. But they found it hard to connect with people nonetheless, and they find that confusing. What I've found in my experience most often when someone has this problem, when we investigate it, we find overinvestment. You're letting them see it all, but you're also doing it all at once. I had someone, sometimes guys will send me screenshots of conversations I've had with girls and stuff just to get my feedback. And quite often what I'll see is this overinvestment. A guy's trying to be honest, which is great. He's sort of stretching his honesty wings, trying to be a bit more vulnerable and raw and bold. But he'll send like 50 things to the girl all at once, you know? And I look at that and I'm just like, no, just give her one thing. So when I say let them see it all, I mean, over time, as they get to know you, nothing will be hidden. And as soon as something is relevant to say, you'll say it. But as we'll talk about in the next slide, only share one thing at a time. Let them speak. So when I say let it all, let them see it all, I'm really talking about let them see the most obvious truth. Like I mentioned in the slide previously, what don't I want to share? If I'm going to let them see it all, it's going to be sharing that thing, right? It doesn't mean like everything I say, I'm like, hey, what am I most ashamed of right now? Because I'm not paying attention to them. I need to react to them and then share. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But let them see who you really are. Let them reject it if possible. You know, if you're feeling antisocial at the party, don't pretend that you're feeling social. Let them see that you're feeling antisocial, tired, confused, nervous. All those things you don't think you're supposed to share. Let them see it. Let them judge for themselves. One of the ways to choose which one of these truths to share, whichever truth risks the outcome is the one to be shared first. If revealing your intentions risks them not going home with you, then reveal your intentions. You know, if showing somebody how you truly feel means that they're most likely to judge you, then show them how they truly feel. Let go of your reputation. You know, if sharing your opinion is going to divide the room and risk making you look like a mean guy, then share your opinion. Share the thing that will ruin the outcome, that superficial outcome, so that the door is open for a deep connection. And it will feel fucking scary to do, but it is, like I said, you can't have quantity and quality. If you hold back the thing to keep the outcome, then you're going for quantity. And if that's what you want, fine, but don't pretend you're going for quality if you do that. Risk the outcome. Lose it. You know, I often call this farting on a date, right? Do the one thing that you think will destroy it, that's truthful. And I've got to emphasize interpretation here. I don't mean try to ruin things. I mean the one thing you're holding back to protect the outcome, make sure you let that thing out first. You know, I used to always hold back attraction from girls because it would polarize them too much. Like once you tell someone you're attracted to them, it's kind of make or break. It's very hard for most people anyway, to maintain a friendship after that, or at least so I believed. So I'd always hold back attraction to try and build up as much as I could before it was revealed, try and get them to invest in me. Very manipulative. So I went through a phase of making sure that if I was attracted to someone, that was the first thing they heard about. That way that outcome of kind of like safe friendship that I was trying to be built was risked. I was like make or break right out of the gate so that I don't have this fucking weight over my head all the time. And the last point here, I call it showing the meal being prepared. Now, this is an analogy I often use to help you picture what honesty looks like. Let's say you're at a restaurant and you're sitting down and they bring out the meal and it's perfectly cooked and it's all laid out perfectly on the plate, prepared perfectly. And that's how you see the meal, this finished product. Real honesty is when you take the customer back to the kitchen, show them the raw ingredients being put together. Now, how does this translate into real life? In real life, this means instead of getting your thoughts perfectly together, and I'm speaking particularly introverts here, instead of getting everything perfectly together before you show them this final product, this well-scripted, perfect version of what you wanted to say, is you actually let them see you thinking through what you're trying to say. So I'll try and come up with an example. I'm going to have to make this up here. Actually, that's me doing it right then. Rather than me going silent, coming up with a perfect example, I just showed you how I'm going to have to make one up and I'm thinking it through. That's the meal being prepared. Can't believe I just did that spontaneously. Oh, that's me doing it again. Fucking hell. The point is, rather than me kind of doing all that prep work in my head, I walk you through the prep. I say, right now I'm thinking of something. I'm still confused about something else. I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say here. This is where you'll start a sentence without knowing how it's going to finish. You'll start making a point without knowing what that point is. You'll start saying something without knowing what you're trying to get across or how people are going to react to it. You show them the preparation rather than getting it all put together in your head and then delivering this, 3 Michelin star meal. Real honesty is in the process, and you'll find deep connections are mostly about process. It's not so much talking about the great trip you went on, but talking about how difficult it was for you to think of how to talk about the great trip you went on. You could say, we went to Bora Bora and it was beautiful there. Or you can say, for this last half hour, I've been trying to figure out how to crowbar my trip about Bora Bora into this conversation because I'm just so proud of myself. That's showing the meal being prepared. It's showing your intentions. It's showing all the rough stuff that chefs never let the customers see. The raw ingredients. Show them how you think, not just the finished thought. Show them how a feeling arises in you. Oh, I've noticed myself tense up when you said that, rather than waiting a while and saying, you know what, I think I disagree with you. Let them show something developing before you even know what it's going to be. That's how a deep connection forms. It takes a lot of practice to do this. I just saw somebody came up with some notes there. Hang on a second. Okay. So Chris says, I've been doing that lately, just blurting out what I'm thinking instead of gathering my thoughts and doing the internal prep work. Interestingly enough, I come across more sincere and vulnerable. Absolutely. If you guys, whoever's interested in this, I recommend the book Radical Honesty. It's essentially a whole book on this process of just letting people see things as it arises in consciousness. But you can practice this by yourself. You can talk out loud all by yourself and describe your thoughts as they occur. You end up using words like, I just noticed a thought that, or this feeling just started in my chest, or whatever. You'll notice how to speak about the prep. So you can still speak about it. Chris used the word blurting there. Sometimes blurting can mean like just randomly letting a voice jump out of your head without any scrutiny whatsoever. I'm not exactly saying to do that. But there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's certainly great practice, if nothing else. But getting used to describing the process of a thought coming to be. So rather than just blurting out a judgmental thought, you might say, you know what, I've got something to say, but it's judgmental, and now I'm struggling to figure out how to put it into words. That's showing the process, It's like, there's so much I want to say about that, but I'm scared to say it, and actually I'm not even really sure how I feel about it. That's the process. That's actually more interesting than whatever it was you were going to say. I'm much more interested in hearing about someone go through the process of being nervous than hearing about the story 3 days later when they resolve the nervousness. I'd rather be there with them. That's real honesty, and it takes a lot of practice. Where were we here? This one. Okay. So that's honesty in a sense. Then respect. So in very simple terms, for the first two phrases, curiosity is thinking, what is the most truthful thing for me to say right now? Honesty is saying that one thing. And respect is stopping to allow the other person to react. And this is where most over-investors fail, is they just blast people with, they just drown them in truth. They overshare instead of giving them one deep and meaningful thing and then just sitting back and letting a reaction happen. And it's also where under-investors fail. They spend whole time just letting the other person doing the work. They ask lots of questions or they stay silent, so the other person's doing all the honesty. You got to balance this back and forth. A game of tennis. Hit the ball to them, one piece of deep and meaningful truth. Shut up and wait for them to hit their own one back, right? But there's some other aspects to the respect phase. So this is the phase where you're actually doing nothing in the conversation but paying attention to them. First and foremost, if you really value quality over quantity, you have to let go of controlling how they feel about you. Respect means allowing them to have their reaction to you without trying to moderate it. without trying to fix it. If they reacted more negatively than you expected, let it be more negative than you expected. Don't try and balance the books. Don't try and correct them. If they've misinterpreted you, let them misinterpret you fully before you respond. Don't jump in and try to fix it when you see it's not suiting your outcomes. Let them feel their feelings, as cheese dick as that sounds, So respect is about constantly releasing control. Sometimes it's actually in what you say. I might be talking to my girlfriend or something, and I realize I'm trying to control her. So I'll say that. I'll be like, I just realized I'm trying to control you again. You say something now. And I just pass it back to her and go, I'm going to just take my foot off the accelerator here, give some power in this conversation back to you. But a lot of times it means just going silent. Let's say you're telling a joke and it's not very funny and you feel this real temptation to tell another joke to kind of redeem yourself. Just bathe in the awkward silence of not funniness. Just say, well, that wasn't funny. Somebody else go now. And just let go of this control you're trying to have over other people. Because control prevents deep connections. Control is for shallow connections. Deep connections are wild, spontaneous, uncontrollable. So let the person just feel whatever they feel. One of the biggest things I actually learned, helpful things from pickup, is I used to think for a girl to be attracted to me, she has to feel nothing but pleasurable emotions. Attraction, excitement, happiness, pleasure, laughter, whatever. But what I've come to realize is that for a girl to really be in love with me, she needs a full range of emotions. And I don't need to try and manufacture that experience like they do in pickup. I can just be me and it will happen. As long as I let them react. I mean, sometimes I'll be offensive. Sometimes I'll be disgusting. Sometimes I'll be confusing. Sometimes I'll be aggravating. As well as sometimes being funny. Sometimes being pleasurable. Sometimes being whatever the fuck. Interesting. It's important that sometimes you're boring. Sometimes you are. Just be whatever you are and let them have their reaction. And they'll build up a whole picture of you that they'll then decide on. And you're wrong to believe that if they come up with nothing but positive reactions that they're going to like you deeply. You'll find some of your deepest connections will be with people who also frustrate you the most. People who annoy you the most or people who confuse you the most. Not always, but there'll be elements of that in there. I have no doubt in my mind that nobody can piss my girlfriend off more than I can. Except maybe her family, who she's probably even more deeply connected to. She doesn't get nothing but pleasure. But my initial girlfriends, especially my first ever proper one when I was 16 or whatever, all I did was give her pleasurable sensations. If she was ever crying, I tried to control her back to happiness. What happened? She got bored of me and left me for another guy who was more ranged, more varied. Stop trying to control them and they will have a range of experience. Listen without attempting to rush them. If you feel a rush to get to a point during a conversation, then you're outcome dependent. You're in the superficial strategy. You're trying to get somewhere. There's nowhere to get to in a deep connection. There's a girl I meet with once a week. She's an ex-client of mine. And we just meet for an hour over Zoom. And our conversation never has a point. It just starts. We usually do a sort of like, how are you feeling type check-in. And then that branches off into some realization, which reminds her of a dream she had, which actually prompts me to remember this time that I was talking to someone about dreams. And it just blows from one. We just bounce the ball back and forth. And quite often we laugh about how off track we get, how our conversation never seems to have a theme. Well, that's what deep connections are like. There's nowhere to get to. The process is interesting. So if you're trying to rush someone to get to a point, then you're not really listening to them. Whatever they're saying is the point. And if they don't make a point at the end of it, then being confusing was their connection, was who they are. And there's nowhere else to be but being confusing, You don't have to stay on a track. This doesn't have to make sense. They don't have to make sense. Let them be senseless. Let yourself finish a sentence that didn't make sense in the end. Like I said, I have little things where I say, and that's my story. That's what I say when I realize I've just finished something and it didn't go anywhere. It doesn't have to. You look at stand-up comedians. If you watch them carefully, they don't make sense, most of them. They just go from one unrelated story or joke to another. But you don't give a fuck. You're not trying to rush them like, come on, what's the point of the story? You're just like, where's it going? Let's see where it goes. It doesn't matter where it goes. It's just interesting. So I often say, like, I remember in earlier times in Brojo, I'd say, I try to listen, but people are boring. So no. Their job isn't to be interesting. It's your job to be interested. Explore how they are rather than trying to get them somewhere. That brings us to the third point. Hear what they're really saying rather than foraging for useful bits of information. See, somebody will listen when they're being superficial and strategic, but they're listening for key things they can use. So like when I was doing pickup, I'd listen to a girl talk, but I'm listening for something I can use to make her like me more, which isn't really listening. It's more like foraging for material. I'm looking for something key. In fact, I'd change the conversation if I couldn't find anything good to use in what she was saying. Whereas in a deeper, meaningful connection, I'm actually just listening to them. I'm not looking for something to use. I'm not trying to find something I can relate to. I'm not trying to find something I can turn into a joke. I'm not trying to find something I can twist in a way that will make them like me. I'm just listening. Let's see what comes out of their mouth. And when they finish talking, I'll see how that makes me feel. That's it. In terms of practical tips to bring this all together, the 3X model, the curiosity phase, is you ask yourself, what's the most truthful thing I could share right now? That's the only question you need to ask. In the honesty phase, you share that thing and just that one thing, and you show it as a process rather than a perfect meal. Okay, just share that thing as it occurred inside you. Don't give it too much thought. Just let it out, even if it doesn't make sense. And then the respect phase is listen to them until they're finished talking, and then decide what you feel about what they said, without trying to jump to conclusions, without trying to finish it inside your head, without trying to direct it somewhere. Let them hit the ball back and let them hit it anywhere they want. Give the power of the conversation over to them. Let them change it. Let them, you might have had this great story you wanted to tell, but then they changed the topic so much that the story is now irrelevant. So let go of the story. Talk about whatever else comes up for you. Or tell them, hey, I wish I could have told the story, but you changed the topic and now I don't know what to say. Show them the process, So that's the 3X model. And how's this thing go? Oh, yeah, that's it. In terms of applying this in the social gardening sense, in the larger sense of building a social circle of deep connections, moving from quantity strategy to a quality one. Stop chasing. Stop trying to get people and focus just on sharing honestly with people. Let go of, every time you have a conversation, be okay with it being the last conversation you ever have with that person, and just enjoy the conversation for what it was. A mindset I used to apply to socializing to make the switch was to imagine that me or the other person were going to die tonight. And so this conversation was our last ever chance to connect. And rather than seeing that as pointless, well, if it's not going anywhere, why should I do it? I saw it as the point is to have this conversation as deeply and as meaningfully as possible. Maybe it's the last one. There's nothing to chase. So guys will quite often have conversations as an investment in a further conversation. They'll talk in a way to make a guy like them so that he'll be their friend later. Talk to a girl to make her more attracted so she'll want to have another conversation later. Have the conversation now. Make it the last one. Make it the best one. By best, I mean most honest. I don't mean most attractive. And then the second kind of principle applies. You want to see someone again? Good. Invite them into your life if you like them, genuinely. If you have a deep connection with them, genuinely. Don't ask them. That's chasing. Don't say, would you like to come on a date with me? Would you like to hang out with me and my friends? Just say, I'd love to see you again. Me and my friends are going out to dinner on Saturday. I hope you be there. Or I'm heading to the beach on Sunday. Be great if I wasn't by myself. I hope you would come along with me. Here's my number. If you want to come, send me a text. Invite people into your life as a deep connection. And make sure that you can tell them why you want to invite them and that the answer is honest. And this is how you'll know if you have deep connections with people or not. If you meet a girl and you're talking to her and you realize the end of the conversation's coming up, you feel compelled to invite her into your life, ask yourself, why? Why do I want to see her again? If it's a deep connection, you should have a clear answer to that. It'll be like, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, I'd love to have another one with you. That would be an honest thing to say. But if it's a shallow connection, you're going to struggle. You're going to be like, because you're hot and I want my friends to see me with you and I want to rack up another vagina if possible. So that would be great. Thanks. Try to be honest with why you want to see someone again, and you're really being honest with yourself here. You're starting to realize, hey, I'm just trying to bring people in for quantity reasons. Whereas if you're like, holy shit, talking to you is just, it's been the highlight of my week. Let's do it again. That's real. And people will say yes to that a lot more than they'll say yes to your pretend interest in them. And the last thing is law of reciprocation. We talked about it in a single conversation. You hit the ball, you wait for them to respond. It also occurs in the building of a relationship. Little things, they're not rules exactly, but like if I flick someone a text and I see that they've read it, I'm not going to flick them another one. The ball's in their court now. It's their turn to respond. I'm going to move on with my life. If I invite someone out and they come with me and we have a good time, it'll be great. I'll say at the end of it, like, you choose the place next time, and then I leave them to it. It's up to them to contact me. It's up to them to come up with something. It's their turn to lead. It's this kind of leadership doesn't mean you do all the work. Leadership doesn't mean you invest more than the other person. Leadership is just about hitting the ball, saying, here, I'll go first, now it's your turn. And you keep this in mind throughout all aspects of a relationship. It means no covert contracts. If you think they owe you something, you say, look, you owe me something. Until you pay that thing, I'm done. This kind of, if someone's the right fit for you, they'll put in the same amount of effort as you will, or close to it. So create the space for them to do that. Be willing to see that they're not going to do it. Send them the text, be willing to see that they're not going to text you back. Invite them out, be willing to see that they won't show up. Don't chase them after that. But you've got an obligation to balance. Don't make them do all the work. All right? If they're doing all the inviting, say, wait, stop. I'll invite you to the next one. You wait till you hear from me. If your girlfriend's the one who's initiating all the sex, go, wait, you know what? Don't start anything sexual this week. It's my turn. Reciprocation, a deep connection must be equally balanced. You must both go deeper together. As soon as one's over-investing, the other one by default is under-investing. And it becomes superficial. Alrighty. So that is my thoughts and rants on creating a deep connection. Ben, Chris, what questions or thoughts do you have left over at the end of all that?
Just to wrap up.
Mm-hmm. Chris, I don't know if you're talking, mate, but I think your connection might be a little weak. Can't hear you. Yep, nothing coming through. Chris, if you're still on the call, mate, I suggest maybe typing your thoughts into the group chat there. Well, Chris may or may not be doing that. Well, thank you guys for listening. Ben and Chris, I want to thank you guys so much for being on the call and participating your thoughts. I really want to see how this applies practically Because at the end, it all comes down to actually using that 3X model the next time you have a conversation with someone you're interested in going deeper with. So for those of you who listen to this call, I want you to follow through. Find somebody in the next 48 hours. Go and have a conversation with them and apply this 3X thing. Think of the truthful thing to say it, let them react. Just apply it and try and go as deeply as possibly can. Try and bring down all your barriers. See what happens. Because this will be nothing but noise until you actually apply it. And a lot of it won't really make sense. You'll think it does, but it won't make sense until you really try it. You know? I remember that one of the first times I properly tried this, I was on a date with a girl. I remember I tried it as soon as she showed up. I saw her walk in. I thought, well, what's the most truthful, kind of shameful thing I can say right now? And the answer was, I'm excited to see her. I could feel the excitement. So as soon as she walked up, gave me a hug, I said, you know, as soon as you walked in the door, I just felt this like excitement come up in me. I don't know why. So I was just raw and vulnerable right out of the gate. And then I just let her react, in which case she blushed, you know. Later on in the date, Later on in the date, I remember specifically this one moment where we're sitting across the table at a cafe and her leg bumped into mine. Must have been an accident. And so I shared my inner intentions. I said, I really hope that there's some form of foreplay, some form of flirt, and it wasn't an accident. Now, she thought that was funny, but she also knew that I wasn't joking. Like, that's actually what I thought. Like, when she touched my leg, I was hoping it was on purpose, kind of flirting. I said that to her, and, again, she blushed and said, oh, maybe it is. So we're allowed to, get playful and flirtatious and sexual because I just let the walls down. And I think we ended up making out right in public at 10 in the morning there at the cafe because there was no rules. We could do whatever we wanted. And I never saw her again. She moved to another country shortly after that, and that was fine. That date alone was a brilliant experience. There's no further follow-up required. We had everything we needed in that moment together. So I actually went and applied this, and I was thinking of the 3X model during this date. And I want you guys to apply the same. This won't work until you go and try it. But you have to understand you're going to be letting go of outcomes. You're letting go of something actually working out. And that's the only way it can really work. Thank you again for listening. Let me know, dan@brojo.co.nz, how your experiments go, where you hit blocks and barriers. And I'll see you guys for the next one. Cheers.